Most people will tell you that taxation is a necessary evil. Apriorians insist that taxation is evil but not necessary. In fact, if taxation was unavoidable, it would be erroneous to consider it evil. The reason why people dislike taxation and yet bow to its necessity is because people believe that the private sector cannot provide social goods. At this point it is imperative we ask which private sector. Because no doubt the other person is thinking about the private sector that is designed to produce what the public sector is less able to generate. The truth of the matter is that the public sector has never been able to take over the private sector successfully, and this is not for want of trying. However, the private sector is able to duplicate everything done by the public sector, just not in the present configuration. The idea that the public sector is necessary, is as said, based on the mistaken notion the private sector cannot provide social goods. This nugget of conventional wisdom is something few seem to have looked at without holding to a lot of unnecessary assumptions. The state actually has no function and no capacity for action other than that of redirecting the private sector by means of a redistribution of assets. The closest approximation to a state we have, is a broker who buys and sells goods and services at the behest of a client. The state, however, has the power of attorney over its clients. If a road is required, the one thing we can all be certain of it is that the government will not move more than a few shovels of dirt during the onset of construction. Nor will the state use a cent of its own money. The state will be absent until the project is completed and it is time to open the road to traffic and accept the accolades of a grateful public. These celebrations will also be paid for by the public. The entire contribution of the state is to extract the funds needed for the project and write checks to the participating contractors. The process could be looked at as one in which the buyer, the traveling public and shippers, order a road. A third party goes around and levies the cost of the road from various sources, not all who drive but who seem to have a capacity to pay a share of the total cost. Then this third party assigns the work to various sellers, the contractors. When the road is completed, the third party, the state, pays the sellers of the road work, and proudly hands the finished product, the road, over to the buyer, but with reservations and restrictions. The question then becomes one of why could not the traveling public and the shipping sector not purchase a road in the sense of paying the contractors through a broker? The usual response to the private provision of public goods, is that it would pay users not to pay their fair share. It pays a trucker to claim he had no use for the road, wait for it to be built and then make use of it. The interesting thing is that the state solution actually exacerbates this problem. It benefits the trucking sector to both claim they have no real use for the road and will not use it or cannot afford it while hoping that the road will be built out of the general revenues. Most public goods are used by those who did not have the means to pay their share. Accepting that taking advantage of a porous system is natural and will happen if allowed to, does not mean the thing to do is to develop a system in which no one is even expected to pay for what they want. Taxation institutionalizes this tendency to exploit a weakness in the system. The error communities make is in adopting a democratic market approach in which individuals get to choose if they will participate or not. Of course, Joe the trucker will vote to abstain from purchasing a share of a road he can acquire for free. This may not be moral, but it is rational at least in the short run. The problem we face as a democratic society is created by democracy itself. It is not rational to permit people to vote, when they have no obligation to abide by the outcome. We see this refusal to carry one's share of the load while demanding more than one's share of the benefits, more and more. A vote has become a means to force others to side with you when you have no intention of supporting them. Even presidential elections conclude with a refusal to support the other side, when the Democrats lose. What we are doing as a society is using democracy to try and settle issues that cannot be settled. Because the situation is immoral and unfair. We cannot debate or negotiate with evil or compromise with freeloaders as to the sharing of what we produced. When the truckers decide to have a road built, this cost must be borne by everyone who uses the road commercially. This means that instead of the state levying every sector and every business and individual for the means to build a road, the trucking sector buys the road from the construction sector. Those who drive pay the cost of driving, including the cost of providing roads. Driving is not a right paid for by the public, but a commodity purchased by the consumer of roads. Roads are a service and miles driven a product that can and ought to be sold. This eliminates the need for taxation and the need for the public sector. A road is not a product in the sense that a bag of carrots is. The buyer and seller of a road are not individuals but economic sectors. But we ought not sell roads but travel. Let's scale the economic transaction back to the level of buyer and seller of a driveway. The homeowner hires a contractor to put in a driveway. This is a simple transaction because it involves two persons, a buyer and a seller. Now let's move up the scale to a housing development. Here we have one man, the owner or boss of the development, who hires a contractor to put in 100 driveways and several roads. This contractor may do all of the work through his own company or with the help of other companies who he subcontracts. But each contract is essentially a transaction between two persons. However, once the homes are built and sold, we have a situation in which 100 individual owners are making use of 100 individual private driveways and say 5 public roads. Usually what happens in these cases is that the government takes over the maintenance of the roads and other public utilities. But there are cases, as in condominiums, where the public space is internal to the structure. In these cases, a board of directors is elected with the authority to act as a governing authority. In such a situation, the chairperson acts in the role of the buyer or seller and chief executive officer for the condominium corporation. If the housing development remained as a gated community, then the roads would remain in private hands, and the individual homeowners would each be under the authority of the agency created to govern the public elements. So, we are seeing that public utilities can and are created and maintained by private entities even within the present system. So, how true is the statement that nothing is more certain than death and taxes? Moving up the scale, think of a community. But, think of this community in the way we think of a gated community. We will postulate the town has 3,000 homes and dozens of roads. The town, under the present system, votes in a council and a mayor, and these officials are told a road is in poor shape and needs repair. The town takes money from those who pay taxes, makes a sum available to the director of public works who, acting as a general contractor, hires companies to do the work. The contractors are paid out of the general revenues. What is wrong with the process is that this is not how the free market works, it is not how human beings are meant to act. This process does not reflect how a community is supposed to operate. The system exists because we have a state that will not relinquish power. The little it does let go of comes with innumerable restrictions and qualifications. Which is why the economy is so problematical and difficult to operate. To understand the nature of the free market, one has to understand the rights of dominion and realize we have a right to what we create, and no obligation to pay the costs that were created by others. There is no reason why a contractor could not build homes, roads, schools, or any of the other things needed by the community, and be paid for the work they do, by the community. All it takes is a record of the hours worked and an agreed upon rate of pay, which is then credited to the appropriate accounts. This happens in reverse when we consume something. The price reflects the labor expended on producing it and the portion consumed by the buyer. If you are a doctor, you treat those who show up needing treatment. The community credits your account for the work you do. Those who use your services have their accounts debited for the price of your services. Everyone works because it never pays the community to pay people not to work. If everyone works, everyone can pay for the services they use. If everyone works, then they can work at the things in demand by the community. We are all both consumer and producer. If we get free things as a consumer, we hurt ourselves as a producer. The reverse is true. If we do not work, we hurt ourselves as a consumer. Our two roles must be in harmony. It is up to the community to keep the two identities in balance through a monitoring of debits and credits. This is a simple overview, but the details are not difficult to imagine. It is possible to have a community without the state and without taxation, but with all the goods we use and need.